On a quiet winter morning in Los Angeles, January 15, 1947, the city had just begun to stir from its slumber. The sun hung low, brushing golden light across rows of small suburban houses. A woman was out walking with her young daughter along Norton Avenue in Leimert Park. The world around them was calm, ordinary, safe. Then she saw it. At first, it looked like a discarded mannequin lying on the edge of a vacant lot, its white skin glinting in the morning light. But as she moved closer, dread began to bloom in her chest. The figure wasn't plastic. It was real. It was a woman's body, severed cleanly in two. The blood had been drained completely, leaving the skin ghostly white. The upper half was arranged with eerie precision, arms stretched above the head, mouth carved into a grotesque, frozen smile. The lower half lay a few feet away, carefully placed, almost as if whoever had done this wanted to be noticed. And soon, the name that would haunt Los Angeles for decades began to spread like wildfire. The Black Dahlia. Before she became a symbol of one of America's most gruesome unsolved murders, Elizabeth Short was simply a young woman chasing a dream. She had grown up in Medford, Massachusetts, one of 5 daughters in a struggling family. Her father had abandoned them when she was just a child, faking his own death in the Great Depression. Years later, when Elizabeth was a teenager, he reappeared without warning, writing to his family as though nothing had happened. Elizabeth, yearning for connection and adventure, decided to live with him in California. But the reunion didn't last. Their relationship fractured, and soon she was on her own again. Elizabeth was strikingly beautiful. Pale skin, jet black hair, bright blue eyes that seemed to carry both innocence and mystery. She wore stylish black dresses and red lipstick, standing out in every crowd. Friends said she was sweet, soft-spoken, and full of dreams. She wanted to be an actress, to make something of herself in Hollywood, where fame seemed only a few blocks away. But the city that promised dreams also had a dark, hungry underbelly. She spent her years moving between cities, Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Barbara, working as a waitress, meeting men, and trying to break into film. To those who knew her, she was kind but private. She had a way of attracting attention, not just for her beauty, but for her aura of mystery. She often told people she had worked in films, or that she was engaged to a military pilot who had died in the war. Some stories were true, others perhaps less so, but they painted the picture of a young woman trying to build herself into something extraordinary. Yet, beneath her charm, Elizabeth was struggling. She often found herself without steady work or a place to stay. She drifted from one friend's couch to another, trying to find her footing in a city that fed on ambition and loneliness in equal measure. Still, she carried herself with grace and a touch of hope. To those who saw her in those final weeks, she seemed optimistic. She talked about new opportunities, about possibly meeting someone who could help her career. No one could have known that she was walking closer and closer towards something unspeakable. The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth was on January 9, 1947, at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She was seen using the lobby phone, reportedly waiting for someone. Then she vanished. For nearly a week, she seemed to disappear from the world completely, until her body was found mutilated and displayed like a grim warning in that empty lot. News of the murder spread across Los Angeles within hours. Newspapers printed every detail they could find, and when details ran dry, they invented more. They called her the Black Dahlia, a nod to her favorite color of clothing, and the noir film The Blue Dahlia that had just been released. The name gave her story a strange, tragic glamour, but also stripped her of her humanity. Beneath the headlines, Elizabeth Short was no longer a woman. She had become a legend, a symbol of Hollywood's darkness and desire. But before the world could fully understand who had done this, or why, the investigation would spiral into chaos. At the scene, detectives stood frozen at first. They had seen murders before, but nothing like this. The mutilation was meticulous, almost artistic in its cruelty. Elizabeth's body had been cut perfectly in half at the waist, each incision clean and precise, suggesting the work of someone with medical or surgical knowledge. Her blood had been completely drained, and her skin was smooth, cold, and pale. There were no signs of blood on the ground, no indication she had been killed there. She had been murdered elsewhere, then brought to this lonely, open field and displayed, posed deliberately, like a grotesque message to the city. Her mouth had been slashed from ear to ear, creating a horrifying, unnatural grin. The newspapers would later call it the Glasgow smile. Her legs were spread apart, her arms raised over her head. It was as though her killer wanted her humiliation to be complete, to turn her body into a statement that would never be forgotten. The coroner's report confirmed the nightmare. Elizabeth had been tortured before she died. There were deep cuts and bruises on her body, rope marks on her wrists and ankles suggesting she had been tied up for hours. Pieces of her flesh had been removed. Her hair had been washed. Even her face had been cleaned carefully, almost tenderly, before being mutilated. Whoever did this wasn't in a rush. They took their time. Detectives named the case DR number 192-147, but to the public, she was now the Black Dahlia. The city's most sensational murder in history had begun. The LAPD was immediately overwhelmed. Hundreds of officers were assigned a case, and the FBI was brought in to help identify her using fingerprints. Within a day, Elizabeth Short's name was known nationwide. Reporters dug into every corner of her life. They found old photos, letters, and acquaintances, printing them with lurid headlines that blurred fact and fiction. They called her a party girl, a wandering beauty, even a mystery woman. None of it captured who she truly was. But the myth of the Black Dahlia was easier to sell than the truth of Elizabeth Short. While the investigation pressed forward, strange things began to happen. On January 24th, just over a week after the murder, a package arrived at the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper office. Inside was Elizabeth's missing belongings, her birth certificate, business cards, photos, and an address book, all neatly cleaned and wrapped in paper. The envelope had been wiped down with gasoline to remove fingerprints. It was signed, the Black Dahlia Avenger. The killer was taunting them. More letters followed, mocking police efforts and promising new victims. Detectives scrambled to trace them, but each one led nowhere. The handwriting changed, the phrasing shifted, and every lead collapsed. It became clear that either the killer was an expert at deception, or there were many people trying to insert themselves into the case. The LAPD chased down more than 150 suspects in the weeks that followed. Everyone from jealous lovers to doctors, soldiers, and even actors were questioned. But every clue ended in frustration. The crime scene itself offered little. No blood, no footprints, no tire marks. It was as though the murderer had vanished into thin air. And yet, one haunting detail stood out: the surgical precision of the cuts. Detectives couldn't ignore it. Someone who knew anatomy had done this. Someone with skill. That realization would lead investigators toward a chilling theory: that the killer could be a doctor. But who? And why Elizabeth? Rumors spread that she had been involved with a man in the medical field. Others claimed she had angered someone powerful or been part of a secret Hollywood circle that punished her for knowing too much. Every week, new names surfaced, new confessions poured in, but none held up. The deeper police dug, the murkier the truth became. And while detectives struggled to untangle the mystery, the city's fascination only grew darker. People lined up to see photos in newspapers. Children whispered about the girl in the lot. Hollywood studios quietly warned their actresses not to walk alone. The Black Dahlia had become both a symbol and a warning, of beauty destroyed, of innocence corrupted, of how darkness can hide behind the bright lights of Hollywood. But behind the headlines, there was still a woman, a daughter, a friend, a dreamer whose story had been consumed by fear and myth. And somewhere in the shadows of Los Angeles, her killer was watching. He was calm, smart, invisible, and he wasn't finished yet. Detectives worked around the clock to find her killer. Captain Jack Donahoe, one of the LAPD's most seasoned officers, took command of the case. Hundreds of leads were followed, but for every clue that seemed promising, 10 more led to nothing. Dozens of men confessed, most seeking attention or struggling with delusion. Some of them recited details they'd read in the paper. Others made up their own, hoping to be part of something larger than their own lives. None of them were the killer. The police soon realized that the person they were hunting wasn't careless. This wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence. It was premeditated, deliberate, and cold. Whoever did this had studied their victim, possibly even spent time with her before killing her. Detectives began piecing together Elizabeth's final days. They found witnesses who had seen her at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th, waiting for someone. After that, she vanished. Some claimed they saw her later that night in various bars. Others said she was a man in a dark suit. But every lead ended the same way, with uncertainty. It was as if she had been swallowed by the city itself. Then came the letters. More arrived at newspapers and police offices, each one laced with arrogance. The author took credit for the murder, referring to Elizabeth only as the Dahlia. Some letters were written in a mix of ransom note style, cut-out words from magazines glued to paper. Others handwritten in a strange, jagged script. One note promised, "I will give up in Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." The handwriting was analyzed, the paper traced, the postmarks examined. Yet nothing stuck. The killer was playing a game, and the LAPD was losing. As detectives searched for anyone with surgical knowledge, the trail led to doctors, especially one man whose name would echo for decades, Dr. George Hodel. A wealthy, brilliant, and eccentric physician, Hodel lived in a striking Mayan-style mansion in Hollywood, where he often hosted elite gatherings filled with artists, socialites, and intellectuals. His name surfaced after rumors linked him to women who claimed to have known Elizabeth. Some even said they had seen her at his house. Hodel's behavior was strange. He was charming, sophisticated, and well-connected, but those who knew him privately spoke of his manipulative, sometimes sinister nature. When police eventually placed him under surveillance, their suspicions deepened. Hidden microphones were installed in his home, and what they captured was chilling. In one recording, Hodel could be heard saying, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." The LAPD was stunned. Yet despite the eerie statements, the evidence was circumstantial. The recordings were ambiguous, and Hodel soon left Los Angeles for Philippines, where he continued his medical career. No charges were ever filed. For years, his name faded into obscurity, until decades later, when his own son, former LAPD Detective Steve Hodel, reopened the case. Steve uncovered old photos, letters, and records that reignited suspicion toward his father. He argued that his father not only had the medical skill and psychological profile to commit the murder, but also the motive and opportunity. His investigation, published years later in Black Dahlia Avenger, reignited public fascination and brought George Hodel's name back into the light. Still, Hodel wasn't the only suspect. Others included Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner and former acquaintance of Elizabeth who had allegedly offered her a place to stay. Another was Leslie Dillon, a bellhop with knowledge of anatomy and a morbid curiosity about the case. Even Orson Welles, the famed filmmaker, was bizarrely named in conspiracy theories due to his fascination with illusions and his unfinished film scenes eerily resembling the Dahlia murder tableau. But every suspect shared one thing in common: no definitive proof. The longer the investigation dragged on, the more it unraveled. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed stories, and the media's relentless coverage began to overshadow the truth. The police faced public humiliation. Detectives were transferred. Files were lost. And the case that once gripped the nation began to fade into the realm of myth. Yet, even as time passed, the figure of the Black Dahlia remained etched into the psyche of Los Angeles, a haunting reminder that beneath Hollywood's glimmering surface lay shadows no light could reach. And still, one question lingered in every investigator's mind. Why? Why had someone gone to such lengths, not only to kill, but to destroy? What had Elizabeth done, or what secret had she known, that made her death so deliberate, so cruel? The answers they would find were buried not only in the evidence, but in the human mind itself. For years, detectives and psychologists have tried to look inside the mind of the person who murdered Elizabeth Short. The brutality of the crime was unlike anything the city had ever seen. But what truly disturbed investigators was the precision. The cuts weren't frenzied or chaotic. They were clean, calculated, and deliberate. Whoever killed her wasn't overcome by rage. They were in control. That realization was far more terrifying. Some experts believed the killer was a sadist, Someone who found pleasure not only in causing pain, but in the artistry of it. The way they displayed her body as if sending a message. Others thought it might have been personal. The way her face was mutilated, the cruel smile carved into her cheeks, seemed to symbolize mockery or betrayal. It was as if the killer wanted to destroy her identity, to erase her beauty and turn it into something grotesque. There were theories of obsession, jealousy, and vengeance. Some said the murderer was someone she trusted, a lover who felt rejected. Others believed it was a stranger who had followed her, captivated by her appearance and aura of mystery. Elizabeth often attracted attention wherever she went, but she also lived a transient, uncertain life. She drifted between friends, apartments, and cities, leaving behind few people who truly knew her. That made her both invisible and exposed, a perfect target. Psychologists later studying the case suggested the killer might have been someone with antisocial or narcissistic tendencies, a person who viewed others as objects to be used, controlled, and discarded. They saw her not as a human being, but as a canvas for their darkest desires. To them, this wasn't merely a murder. It was an act of dominance. Detectives were haunted by one chilling truth. The way her body had been handled indicated care, even tenderness. Before the mutilation began, her skin had been washed, her hair brushed, her face cleaned. It was as if the killer admired her, even loved her, before destroying her completely. That duality, the mingling of affection and hatred, spoke of a mind split between desire and destruction. When the letters signed the Black Dahlia Avenger began arriving, they seemed to confer what the detectives feared, that the killer wanted recognition. Each note carried a smug tone, taunting the police for their failures. This wasn't someone hiding in shame. This was someone who wanted the world to know what they had done, and that they were too clever to be caught. But what drove such a person to that point? Some theorized that Elizabeth had reminded the killer of someone from their past, a lover, a mother, or a woman who had humiliated them. The surgical dissection, the methodical way the body was arranged, could have been an attempt to deconstruct that symbol of rejection, to regain control. It wasn't just about killing. It was about erasing and rebuilding. Other investigators thought the motive was rooted in power itself. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city of dreamers and predators, men with money, connections, and secrets. The underbelly of Hollywood was filled with exploitation, especially for young women seeking fame. Elizabeth may have crossed paths with the wrong person at the wrong time, someone powerful, untouchable, and dangerously unhinged. Then there were the whispers of ritual. Some criminologists noted the almost ceremonial way her body had been displayed, the perfect symmetry, the drained blood, the deliberate posing. It resembled symbolic acts seen in certain psychological or occult patterns, not necessarily satanic, but ritualistic in the sense that the act itself was deeply personal to the killer, as if it meant something only they could understand. In the decades since, the psychological profile of the murderer has been revisited countless times. Each expert finds new angles: psychopathy, control, resentment, sexual sadism. But the truth remains elusive. What unites all these theories is one chilling idea: that the killer had done something like this before, or would do it again. The FBI files describe the murderer as a person of above-average intelligence, skilled with their hands, possibly trained in medical or artistic disciplines, and emotionally detached. A person capable of planning, executing, and concealing an atrocity, then walking away from it as though nothing had happened. And perhaps the most disturbing thought of all is that this person may have lived the rest of their life quietly, respected, even loved, while carrying the secret of what they had done. The murder of Elizabeth Short was more than a crime. It was a revelation of the human soul's capacity for cruelty. It showed that evil doesn't always announce itself with rage or madness. Sometimes, it wears the face of calm intelligence. Sometimes, it looks just like everyone else. As the years went on, the Black Dahlia case became more than a mystery. It became a mirror, forcing people to confront the darkness that hides beneath civility. And yet, for all the psychological theories, one truth remained. No one ever answered the question of who. But what couldn't be solved in evidence would leave scars that stretched far beyond one victim. Because after Elizabeth Short's death, nothing about Hollywood, or the people who dreamed within it, ever felt the same again. The murder of Elizabeth Short didn't just scar Los Angeles. It changed it. The city that once glimmered with hope and cinematic fantasy suddenly found itself haunted by the image of a young woman whose dreams had been devoured by its darkness. Her death became a symbol, a warning, and a myth that refused to die. In the weeks after the murder, the public grieved, but also obsessed. Newspapers couldn't print enough about the Black Dahlia. Headlines painted her as everything from a glamorous socialite to a secret seductress. Every photo of Elizabeth was analyzed, her smile, her eyes, her posture, as if somewhere in her beauty there might be a clue. The city became divided between pity for her and morbid curiosity about her killer. But for her mother, Phoebe Short, the pain was unimaginable. She had learned of her daughter's death in the cruelest way possible, through a phone call from a reporter who tricked her into believing Elizabeth had won a beauty contest, only to reveal the truth minutes later. Her heartbreak became national news, her daughter's memory picked apart by strangers who had never met her. Elizabeth's friends spoke of her kindness, her laughter, her restless spirit. They couldn't reconcile the lively, hopeful woman they'd known with the headlines describing her as a fallen starlet. Some of them were questioned repeatedly by police, their names dragged into the spotlight, their grief twisted into suspicion. In their eyes, Elizabeth wasn't the Black Dahlia. She was still Beth, a young woman who loved movies, wrote letters home, and dreamed of finding her place in the world. But Los Angeles moved on, as it always does. The film studios returned to their business, the reporters to their next scandal, the city to its glimmering facade. Yet beneath that surface, something fundamental had changed. The Dahlia murder had exposed the underbelly of Hollywood, the loneliness, the desperation, and the predators who thrived in the shadows of fame. Over time, the story faded from the front pages, but it never disappeared. Every few years, new evidence or theories reignited public interest. The name Black Dahlia became part of American folklore, inspiring movies, books, songs, and art. She became an icon of mystery and tragedy, a ghost forever wandering Los Angeles. For detectives who worked the case, the lack of closure haunted them until their final days. They had seen evil up close, and it had slipped through their fingers. The files grew dusty, the suspect grew old, and witnesses died. Yet even now, investigators, both professional and amateur, still revisit the case, convinced they can find what others missed. And then there are those who claim to know the truth. Some point to Dr. George Hodel, whose own son's investigation decades later seemed to tie every thread together. The surgical skill, the house near the site, the cryptic recordings, the arrogance that matched the killer's letters. Others believe the murder was someone else entirely, lost to time and anonymity. But the truth is that after all these years, no one knows for certain. Elizabeth's short story is not just about one horrific act of violence. It's about the fragility of dreams, the masks people wear, and how easily beauty can become tragedy. It's about a young woman who came to Hollywood chasing a fantasy, only to become one herself, a legend crafted by the very city that failed to protect her. The lot where her body was found is now just another patch of grass in a quiet neighborhood. People drive by without realizing the history buried beneath their tires. Yet, sometimes those who stop say they feel something, an inexplicable chill, a heaviness in the air, as if the city still remembers. To this day, the question lingers: who killed Elizabeth Short? Was it a jealous lover, a deranged doctor, a stranger hiding in plain sight? Or was it something larger? Something about Los Angeles itself, a city that consumes its dreamers one by one? We may never know. But what we do know is that Elizabeth's story refuses to fade. Every new generation discovers her, stares into those haunting black and white photographs, and feels the same unease that gripped the world in 1947. The Black Dahlia isn't just a murder victim. She's a reminder of how darkness hides behind beauty, how innocence is swallowed by ambition, and how easily truth can be buried beneath legend. Even now, nearly 80 years later, her mystery endures. And somewhere in the quiet corners of Los Angeles, the echo of her story still whispers through the night, softly, sorrowfully, reminding the city that not all of its stars ever make it home. If this story sent chills down your spine, take a moment to honor Elizabeth Short. not just as a Black Dahlia, but as a dreamer whose light was stolen too soon. What do you think really happened that night in Los Angeles? Was it obsession, jealousy, or something far more sinister hiding beneath Hollywood's golden glow? Share your theories in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to uncover more untold true crime mysteries that history tried to forget, hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and join our growing community of truth seekers. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we give the forgotten a voice.